Well, welcome everyone. We're going to get started here. Thank you for your patience. My name is Alan Katz. I'm here in Brooklyn, and I am the owner and distiller at York Distilling Company, also based here in New York City, where I have a specialization over the last 10 years or so in gin and rye whiskey, but I've really had the great pleasure and privilege over nearly the last 20 years of being able to take recurring trips to Cognac in different seasons of the year, which we'll discuss that importance in a bit of detail, for grape harvest, for distilling season, which it specifically is in the Cognac region, and for classes and seminars on blending cognacs together to achieve a finished product. And so it's really with great excitement that I get to participate and speak with you this evening. I hope that you will participate as well. And also a pleasure to be joined by Tia Keenan, who is also here in New York and Queens, a well-known writer and cook, and most of all this evening, cheese specialist. And she's worked in a broad range of creative and food-based projects, from Walt Disney to Bienqui. I hope you've been there. What a spectacular bakery, to restaurant and really vital retail programs as well. Certainly one of our most acclaimed cheesemongers here in New York City at Murray's Cheese. And if you haven't, I'm sure you can find online some of Tia's great writing in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and Bon Appetit. And you should also check out her book, including The Art of Cheese Plate, Pairings, Recipes, Style, Attitude, and Short Stack Chèvre, and Melt, Stretch, and Sizzle, The Art of Cooking Cheese. And so thank you, Tia. I'm really excited to share this hour with you and with everyone else in really a most fun manner to explore. And we'll take this as seriously as it deserves, to explore the connection, if you will, by texture, by aroma, and by taste of these two unique and distinctive agricultural products, cognac and cheese. So as we begin, go ahead.
I just wanted to say thank you, Alan, and I'm so happy to be here in this dual borough excursion through Cognac. And welcome to everyone. I'm really happy to be here and to eat cheese with you and taste these amazing cognacs.
So if you will, dim your lights gently. We have a brief but brilliant video to set the mood and inspire everyone as we begin. Now that's just to wet the whistle. If you've never been, you may think, I'd rather be anywhere but my apartment, and that's a place to go. I tell you that it is, and though those shots from that video, as you can surmise, were likely from late spring through late summer, the vines are in bloom, I tell you that Cognac is a brilliant and beautiful place to visit year-round. In fact, some of my favorite visits have been in the winter time, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. Now we will, in earnest, get to this cognac and cheese tasting, and I know the aromas are wafting wherever you're sitting, just like they are at my desk here, but we do want to take you through a really brief introduction to the rudimentary elements of cognac, what it is and how it's made. And so we have a little bit of a presentation that we'll go through together here, and if you have questions along the way, you can put them in the Q&A section. If you're tagging anything related today on social media, please do @ or hashtag Cognac USA or hashtag Cognac Connection, which we'd be pleased to share that space with you and your social media friends as well. So enjoy. Here we go. So cognac, as you may have heard, is an eau de vie, made from wine. And of course, we see the grapes there on the vine. And there is a particular style, of course, to this eau de vie. and a particular region that it's from, and you can continue on, Beth, on the slide. And what we talk about in the nature of cognac is that it is distilled. That, of course, is what makes this truly an eau de vie, an eau de vie from wine. And we'll have a couple of images here about the most relevant, the most important things that influence the finished product, like the ones we will taste today. And this is just a fun word. I know you're all muted and not technically with us in person, although you are there, but this is a fun word to say out loud. And you can practice it before I say it out loud. That first word at the top of this slide, it's charente. Oh, you just want to let it linger like it's a note of music. It almost feels like Edith Piaf in World War II. Charente, and it just lingers on like some of the flavors will. And it is fun to do. I've said it for years, but the context of what this apparatus does is about as unique as there is in the universe of distillation. Now, we as Americans or our friends in France, we did not create distillation. That certainly comes from China centuries ago. You could in many ways say that it was perfected by several European communities, whether the Dutch, the Scotch, the Irish. The Scotch and the Irish had significant influence as we began our journey as distillers in the United States, but the Dutch really played a vital role in progressing distillation in France. And in many ways, the idea, as we all know, the world-renowned grapes and wine varieties that come from France, whether it's Bordeaux or Champagne or other names that we're familiar with, was that in the region of Cognac, sort of tucked in down on the southeastern coast of the country, very much facing the Atlantic Ocean, that these grapes, that some will argue, are not great for drinking wine. I would say they're okay for drinking wine. I'll keep that to myself, but that's my point of view. But that these grapes are not at the height, at the zenith of wine producing grapes. And so in a different place and time, it was deemed that they would be more ideal for distillation, for in fact, making cognac. And so you see some of these terms here, which we'll go over. Most important to keep in mind is that the rules and regulations for cognac could fill a several inch thick book. To give you context, the rules and regulations for making bourbon are 2 paragraphs. That's from our federal government. If you don't believe me, there's a useful website called ttb.gov, and you can Google ttb.gov chapter 4, and it will list all the rules and regulations of spirits that are not only made in the United States, but those that are sold in the United States. And again, taking us back to the European Union, and long before, frankly, there was a European Union, the rules and regs on cognac are vast and are very specific. From an American point of view, you might say, oh my goodness, there's so many rules. Who would want to do that? But the truth is, the traditions go down not just for generations, but for centuries. And because, as we'll discuss, the blending techniques of cognac sometimes traverse generations of blenders, you have to have full commitment and pride in your work, because it may very well be passed on to a generation or even 2 or 3 ahead of you that have not even been born yet. And you lay your work in the hands of someone else to complete a finished product that you may say, I'm starting this, but have no concept of what the finished product will be. There's a wonderful romance to this. So we'll continue on in our slide work here. So we have a fun little quiz for you, and you may answer this. It does say this, T and I, we're not eligible to vote, but we want a great aggregate score here. So please, we'll take just about 30 seconds in preparation, just to see where we are as a group. And you may.
I really wanted to vote, but.
I know, yeah. I do too, I always want to participate. I'm not gonna sing any theme music tonight, but you can whistle it in your mind. We'll take just about another 10 seconds. The winners, like everyone else, simply get to continue on in our presentation this evening. Okay. Okay. Oh, all right. Very interesting. I think we've done pretty well, but we'll discuss these in detail. All cognacs are brandy, but not all brandy is cognac. That is true. There are brandies from California, from other parts of France. Certainly there are brandies from Spain. Cognac is under the broader umbrella of brandy. So the next question, the main grape used in cognac production today is in fact Uni Blanc. And just a quick aside, because I do feel compelled to discuss it, Uni Blanc, as someone who lived and cooked for 2+ years in Italy, is related in many ways to the Italian grape Trebbiano. Again, not at the height of the most elegant wines, but would I open a bottle of Trebbiano or Uni Blanc most nights and enjoy it with cheese or otherwise? Yes, I would. So I don't want to denigrate the Uni Blanc too much in the context of wine, but it has found its sturdy home over generations as the main grape used in cognac production. Folie Blanche and Colombard are lesser used grapes for a variety of reasons, but they are also used in many cognacs. Now, very interesting. The minimum age for spirit to be considered cognac. This is very interesting. So I'm not sure I see, oh, there we are, the entire screen. Yes, okay. Oh, no, we didn't do as well as we hoped here. The minimum age for a VS, for example, is the youngest brandy in the blend must be aged for at least 2 years in casks. So 2 years would be the correct. There are different designations that we'll go through as well. Cognac is best enjoyed, simple but trick question, is all of the above, over ice with a splash of tonic, shaken or stirred in a cocktail. We'll relegate this very quickly, like I would say for most spirits, but particularly for something like cognac, if you're not accustomed to it, that by its base nature is typically bottled at 40% alcohol or 80 proof. That's relatively high alcohol. If you're a wine drinker, for example, the highest percentage ABV that you might find a wine is maybe 14, 15% these days. That would be a very high ABV wine. We're talking about spirits, as many are, in that 40% range. So you may taste it neat, as I'm certainly going to do tonight, and say, wow, that's strong. It depends what you're accustomed to. But I would say what the most important factor is, no matter the spirit, is that it should taste good to you. So if you want to add a few drops of water, if you feel compelled and it's within reach to add an ice cube, you may do that. But certainly, and I would say a lot of this is influence of the last generation, particularly the influence of cocktail culture, not just in places like New York, but around the world, has found mass acceptability of cognac in all the varieties that are listed there. I will say cognac, like whiskey, if you're going to add water, add a little bit at a time. And if you probably get to somewhere more than 25% water to 75% cognac, well, maybe that spirit is just not to your liking. We want to use water just to open things up a little bit, to tamp down on some of that high proof nature so that you can taste the essence of the eau de vie. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, one of the great influences, this is so exciting to me, maybe you'll geek out like I will, on soil. Who's been outside in the last 7 months? Well, if you have kids like mine, they've been digging in the dirt, and none that looks like the ones on this slide. And what's most important to share with you is that these slides, these soil samples, if you will, these soil images really reflect the diversity of the range of geography and topography in the region of Cognac. And you can see at the bottom where these different soil types are typically found. So as you would expect, a more sandy or loamy soil, as it would be called, would logically be found in coastal areas. And you might also surmise what influence that might have on grapes that are grown there. You might have a little bit more salinity or sharper acidity to the grapes. And the nature of this range from sand to clay and flint to much hardier clay in some of the higher elevations is really what imparts the different flavors from different districts or regions in Cognac where grapes are grown. Some of it's farm to distillery. Some of it, like many parts of the wine universe, are grown by contract to sell then to distilleries or Cognac brands that are sourcing these grapes on their specific variety, their hereditary nature, both of flavor and aroma, so that years in the making again, we can take samples from different barrels and ultimately blend them together in a finished product. The next slide, please. So, as a distiller, perhaps the most exciting slide to me, I could spend a night on this alone. This is the two-dimensional image of the distillation of Cognac. So the things that are most of nature. One we probably are familiar with is a swan neck. There are many European varieties of still, whether for Cognac or Scotch whiskey, for example, that incorporate a swan neck. What's very interesting is you see the image of fire underneath what's called the boiler or the kettle. Now again, this is all made of copper, and you might assume that fire is simply there on this image to indicate that the still is being heated. Well, yes, it is, of course. However, in the rules and regulations of Cognac, by law, the Cognac still, the Chanteray still, must be heated by open flame. That would never be legalized in our country. So it has to be a very safe environment, a very controlled environment. This is not something new, but something that has been preserved in heritage for centuries. And you'd say, oh, they're just preserving it because it's by tradition. The truth is, in modernity, you can in fact control, like you're dialing on your stove, the level of fire or flame underneath the still. So there's really a great control apparatus to how much heat is being incorporated to this process. Now, the nature of distillation is that you take your base liquid. In this case, it is fermented wine, and you distill it. What is distillation? It is the refinement of alcohol. Fermentation, as I'm sure you're aware, is the creation of alcohol. So we're taking fermented liquid and we are distilling it to refine it. And it goes through this contraption, and you can sort of wind your own direction through the swan neck, through the preheater. That's just a tube that goes through the preheater, which we'll get to in just a moment. And it goes through the swan neck to the condensing coil. And a condensing coil, as you see it again two-dimensionally, is that series of coils that simply has consistently cold water reverberating around it to shock what's been turned from liquid to vapor in the heating process back into liquid, and then ultimately is captured and put into barrels for aging. Now let's go back to that wine preheater, because this is something you don't see virtually anywhere else in the world but Cognac. And this is really the genius of the distillation aspect, in my opinion. The wine preheater is incorporated so that during the duration of the run of what's in the boiler, let's call it our first run, what's being distilled in the boiler and what reaches about 78 degrees Celsius and then turns from liquid to vapor and begins its long process of going through the swan neck to the condenser, etc. That to save time, the second batch is being preheated. And you see the image of these toggles on the neck. Now, the lower piping system that goes, if you will, from the preheater back to the still, enables the distiller, upon the completion of the first run, to take wine that has already been warmed, add it to the warm still, and get a jump start, if you will, on the distillation process. Why would that be so vital? Well, one of the other unique rules and regulations in cognac distillation is that you have a very specific time frame. I can make whiskey any day of the year that I want. In cognac, there is a specific calendar that you are legally able to make cognac, distill cognac, and not a day after. You may make it from October to the end of March. And on April 1st, you may not distill cognac anymore until the passing of the next harvest 2 seasons later. So the aspect of a wine preheater saves time when you're scrambling to get every bit of distillation day by day, week by week, month by month, through autumn, winter, and into the earliest days of spring, so that you can take a breather and then get on to your blending. So I hope this is clear. If there are any questions, you certainly can ask. But I would say this is as straightforward an image of cognac distillation and the unique nature of it as we can find. We'll go on to the next slide. So aging and blending, we know what those terms mean. The context, though, for cognac really applies to some of the delineations that we're familiar with and that we'll be tasting tonight, like VS for very special, or VSOP, very superior old pale, or XO for extra old. These all refer, in the most simplistic, straightforward ways, to the minimum aging of eau de vie in the blend that becomes cognac. As we said, VS means the youngest eau de vie is 2 years old. VSOP, the minimum, is 4 years old. And XO, as recently as 2018, when rules were changed, now means that the youngest eau de vie in a blend are 10 years old. And that's very important because we have the capacity to incorporate eau de vie that might be 20, 50, 60 years old that really impart unique flavors and aromas that make up singularly special cognac. So the context for aging and blending is that blending is as interesting and valuable a technique as distilling is, as grape growing and cultivation is, and that the overseeing of aging is vital, and that there are specific influences. Perhaps the most pronounced is the wood that's used. We're using European oak primarily, oak from France, from Slovenia, and to keep a simple context, to note that oak from Europe, by and large, is a much denser wood than wood from the United States. And the other context that might be unique in comparing a relationship is that in cognac, we're going to toast wood. And I love the image of an old-fashioned toaster where you're going to push that button down and your piece of toast gets clamped between the two metal barricades. And the heating mechanism never touches the toast. It's protected by that barricade, but ultimately it gets that gentle toast. In the United States, we are rough and tumble. We char wood. We put flame right against it. And the treatment and how you either toast or char wood has a direct effect on the finished product and the types of flavors that you will derive over the course of the aging process. Let's go on to the next slide. I promise we're close, we're close. So these are the types, again, of flavors and aromas that we might start to think about from the wood and that we're imparted on. You might keep these in context as we begin our tasting. Vanilla, clove, and all the things that relate to clove, cinnamon and allspice, Coconut is an interesting one, again, from the gentle toasting of wood rather than charring it. One more slide, please. Again, some of the effects of what the toasting has on wood, and you might taste in the cognacs tonight. Almonds, again, vanillas and flowers come from a little bit longer toasting, and then a much stronger heating. You might even get incorporation, certainly of smoke, but also smoked salmon or smoked fish in general. So some things to keep in mind, particularly as you might associate some of these things with the cheeses as well. And if we have one more, just to leave with some of the imagery, you can look at this and close your eyes off and on just for 10 seconds and see what images you can pick out. I picked out bananas, roses, tangerines, marmalade, and somehow, because my kids are here in the next room, candy. And just pick out a few that you might hold on to and linger with as we now begin our tasting and say, do I detect any of these? Or perhaps others that you might have an affinity for, but as it says, from an olfactory sensation, and the olfactory is up here, behind our eyes, behind this big plate in our heads, and we'll talk about how we want to taste and smell cognac in a moment. But these are the types of things in an ethereal way that we want to derive in the most pleasurable context from the cognac and the cheese individually and together. Are you ready? That's a rhetorical question, of course. Here we are. So I will, Tia, if you want to just give a little tee up, if you will, on the context from your perspective on
Sure.
pairing cheese with cognac.
Yeah, that was really interesting, Alan. Thank you. I just want to mention that all of these rules and the tradition and the preservation of artisanal technique over generations for cognac is also practiced with cheese in France. And one of the reasons that we're able to be here today enjoying these agricultural products from France or inspired by France is because the French people and understood the significance and the specialness of their agricultural culture and were really visionary in doing the work to protect that legacy. And so that applies in their cheeses as well as their cognac. So I just want to remind people about tasting in general is that we look, we smell, and then we taste with our mouths. This is true of spirits, and it's also true of cheese. I think with cheese, a lot of times we forget the look part because we want to smell it and we want to taste it. But looking is really important with cheese, and it can tell you a lot about a cheese. And of course, we know to look at spirits because we're looking for color, we're looking for clarity, and all of that. So we want to taste I think the format for today is taste the cognac, then taste the cheese, then go back to the cognac. And then I think between each pairing, probably some water just to refresh the palate. Right, Alan?
Here we go.
All right. So you're going to take us through this first cognac. Oh, I forgot. We have a poll. And this one is fun. People ask me all the time, if you were a cheese, what cheese would you be? So I'm going to ask you, if you were a cognac and cheese pairing, would you be rich and nutty, youthful and bright, smooth and woody, or fruity and complex? And y'all have about 30 seconds to answer that. And I do think that pairings are like horoscopes or something, that they can tell you a lot about a person. So I'm excited to see what you all are going to identify with. Of course, I'm going to identify with youthful and bright.
Oh, I submitted. I'll reveal mine at the end.
Oh, and we have results. Oh,
Okay. Well, that's great. We know who we have now.
rich and nutty. Well, I'll have to say for Instagram, people really like that. With second place of youthful and bright, then fruity and complex, and then we have some, just a small number of people who said they were smooth and woody, and cheers to you, because I appreciate those people.
Well, here we go. Tia, this is going to be great fun.
Let's do it.
I'm going to real briefly talk about smelling. I know if you have it, a tulip glass or a wine glass is ideal. In my effort to demystify a little bit, I'm using just a regular rocks glass. You can use a water glass. Obviously, there are ideals, but at the end of the day, we have this, and we have this. And those things work well. What I would suggest is that I have a wine fetish, like most, and the concept of swirling glasses around is fun. It's meditative. Not just for cognac, but I would say for all spirits, we want to do our best to avoid that. As we talked about, these are such high-proof spirits that if you swirl it around, what you're really releasing is all the alcohol. And all we really get in that nature is a plume of alcohol thrust in your nose, and it makes it that much more challenging to taste the innate qualities of the spirit we're trying to evaluate. One other element, and I wish I could see you now, but you'll get a laugh at my expense, is how we smell. And again, using the wine context for a visual image, and again, my own fetish, I love to take a long, slow draw with my nose in the glass of what is the true character of the aroma of the wine. It's fun. It absolutely is. Again, for us with high proof spirits, if we just take that long draw in, we're predominantly going to get alcohol. So what I recommend, if you'll play along with me, is rather than the long draw, think of your favorite pet. Primarily if it's a cat, a dog, or as a small cousin of mine recently got from her parents, a bunny rabbit. These are inherent animals that smell things to a far greater degree than we do. They sniff, quick, short sniffs. 1, 2, 3, and put it away. Now, doing it tonight with me and with Tia for the first time, this may work. You may be challenged by it, but I guarantee you, if you commit to 1, 2, 3 and put it away with distilled spirits for the next month, you will incorporate an entirely new and useful means of taking the noted aromas of these products. So here we are. Go ahead.
Want to know what I'm getting?
What are you getting?
I'm getting orange blossom.
This is it. This cognac is known, Mucau. This is a VS. Again, so we know that the youngest in this blend of eau de vie has been aged for at least 2 years. And I couldn't agree more. I relate this to other French liqueurs almost, like Cointreau or Combier, which are noted, or Grand Marnier, noted orange liqueurs. And you get.
I just want to say that we haven't rehearsed this part.
No, not at all. That's a great point, Tia. That's a great point. That if I was to go a little bit deeper, and yes, I will say I have tasted these before. Yes, it's dominant on orange, but then you might go a little bit deeper into stone fruit, whether it's apricot
for
or
sure.
mango, or a little bit deeper. If I go back one more time and take it away, and you can call me crazy, but something that's somewhere, I might call it leather. I might call it the faintest note of black licorice, one or the other, that's just there as a nice undulating note of depth on the nose. And if you want, again, go ahead and take that palate, take it to your, go ahead and take a sip. And you want to see how it feels in your mouth. Can you hold it there for a few seconds? As you swallow it, there should be some burn. It is alcohol. but it shouldn't be so aggressive that it doesn't feel pleasant or that the alcohol dissipates, that it burns off relatively quickly. And again, for me, there's that licorice note.
Yeah, for sure.
There's that licorice note. And a little bit of honey, very gentle honey. And even, again, looking back at some of those images for our olfactory senses, some flavors of orange again. A common flavor that almost can never be wrong is wood. It's been aged in wood. The context for me is what kind of wood. And for this, as a relatively young cognac, I think it has a nice, gentle oak flavor. And
I'm getting like licorice necco.
yes, that's it. So
Exactly
candy
it.
and licorice together. So
Yeah.
as a VS, I find this relatively complex and even something that you could sip on, let alone use in a cocktail, and pair quite nicely with this great cheese.
So let's talk about the cheese for a second. I just want to make sure that people understand how they're supposed to cut this cheese, because I know you all go to parties and some monster cuts off the edge. It's like a pie. If you went to a party and you saw a pie, you'd know instinctively just to cut yourself a slice like this. It should be the same with all your round cheeses. And that's so that you get an equal amount of rind and paste. And so I chose this cheese because it's very creamy. This is Nettle Metal Cognac. It's goat's milk and cow's milk cream. It's got some of that nice, like, pasture florals thing happening. But I felt like I wanted that was going to, like, really receive the cognac. So I went with mild, and you'll notice that on this board, I actually chose 3 sort of soft ripened cheeses, because this is what I like with cognac. I know that people are, they often want these sort of like after dinner robust cheeses, like blue cheeses, but I actually prefer the soft ripens with cognac. So again, this is Nettle Metal Cognac. It's goat's milk with cow's milk cream. It's kind of yeasty, you know. It's a little bit salty, so it's got this real butter flavor, and it always reminds me too of saltine crackers.
Fun.
So I wanted to do it with this guy just to kind of give a really nice, in the first cheese pairing, just a really nice coating on the tongue of fat so that you would want to reach for the cognac again, because a good pairing is like a reciprocal thing. One makes you want the other. So I wanted to kick off with something that was really going to make us like want this cognac.
I would say you can really go ahead and coat your mouth with this cheese. Upper tongue, the sides of your mouth, if you were into it, even your teeth a little bit.
Yeah, it's
and
really...
then go back. And that earthy, gentle, almost like dirt context is something that really is nice, I think, in the pair of these 2 products.
I like the saltiness too, with the sort of little bit of honeyed notes happening in the cognac. You've got this like sweet and salty thing going. I see someone in the chat, should we eat the cheese alone or with crackers and bread? I'm always going to say, when we're doing a pairing like this, so a beverage and a cheese pairing, skip the crackers and the bread. It's just like another element that we don't need. I would use water. If you need crackers or bread between pairings to sort of reset, I think that's the way to do it. But I'd say you don't need crackers and bread. So we ready for this next one? Now that I've had my first piece of cheese, I'm like,
warmed up.
Let's go.
Okay, so Hardy. Now here we go. This is our VSOP. And I'll let you on your own read about the history of these really magnificent cognac houses. But this will be an equal treat in sort of a tradition of what we would call fine champagne cognac. And this is a wonderfully balanced cognac. Make sure, if you, as Tia said, just take a little sip of water in between. And we'll take that aroma together. Again, let's just do these short sniffs. Here we go. And again, we can look at the color as well. This really looks like golden pears. It comes to mind because I think it's on the aroma as well. A little bit of that fresh golden pear, or almost to the point of the pear starting to be caramelized. And then unique and a little bit different from our first cognac is that we start to get some of that clove. If you don't get it, again, we just had cognac and a very flavorful cheese. Let's just take another chance to smell that together. And right past that fruit, to me, is that hint of clove or cinnamon. Just like it's dancing on the top, almost as if you can feel the sprinkling of cinnamon or clove on a little bit of French toast. And then you might also get sort of the context of salted nuts, like roasted cashews that are salted in particular. Go ahead and take that.
You really get the spices on this
There
one
it
in a
comes.
way that's just so different from the first one.
But
And so
so
for this cheese,
gentle.
we're going to have Vermont Creamery's Cremant. This is from Vermont. It's another goat milk with cow's milk cream. And you'll notice a theme in the cheeses that I chose here. I have a very strong opinion about what cheeses go with spirits. And it's probably a little unorthodox. I really like these creamy ones with these spirits. Oh my gosh. That's really good.
There's such a sweetness to it, but I also think it's fun with the pear, or maybe you taste other fruits, which would be logical.
There's definitely the pear in here, but also like hay, a little bit of that yeastiness, but to me it's really like a toasted hay or toasted oats. Again, that saltiness that I think goes really, I love this salty, creamy vibe with cognac in general.
And there's a great comment in here from Lisa. Thank you. Citrusy, pineapple-y.
Yep.
Love it. And now that citrus element, if you will, or acidity that might come from a fascination with pineapple might match up with the lemony, creamy Cremant cheese. What a great, great comment. Thank you.
For sure. And that lemon too is really like on the finish, which I love because there's a real sort of arc that happens when you're having this cheese. I think on the front, you're getting like the that hay, that toasty hay, you know, fresh hay. Like if you've ever been to a barn and they like throw a bale down, and when it hits the floor, you get that smell.
Exactly.
And that's really there with this cheese, I think. And I love it with the little bit of spiciness and the cognac. They're talking to each other for sure.
Let's continue.
All right.
So our next is the Hennessy VSOP, the privilege in our plain English, if you will. And we'll go ahead, same practice of taking a bit of that aroma. Now this, oh my goodness, even before I got it to my nose, a much heartier, interesting complexity of aromas. It's important to note that this is a blend of over 60 different eau de vie. And it comes from 4 of the different growing regions in cognac. And for the first time of our tasting tonight, a real myriad of fruit flavors to me, and a lot of it in the context of sugar, caramel, caramelization of tropical fruits. So I get, again, more of mango, banana, coconut, some of those things that we saw on the imagery. There is some citrus there as well, but I think it's that caramelization that makes this so alluring to want to taste.
And the cheese is another milk cheese. So again, this theme for me, when I'm looking at cheeses with spirits, a lot of times when I have OPP, other people's pairings, I feel like the spirit overwhelms the cheese. And so in mixed milk cheeses, I think you get a level of like complexity of flavors that can help with the equation of standing up to cognac or to spirit in general. So this is Sapio. How gorgeous is this cheese? I hope you cut it like a jelly roll, right? And it's got some more age on it. You can tell because it's firmer. Oh yeah. And it's fruity.
What's interesting to me is that the richness or the fattiness, if that's the appropriate term, Tia,
Absolutely,
the
totally.
cheese really starts for me to bring out more fruit flavors.
Yeah.
So we talked about some tropical notes. Now I'm getting more apple notes, sort of that acidic bite that you get sometimes of a fresh Macoun apple right in the joints of your mouth.
Yeah.
Hillary has a question about the acidity of cognac, which is very interesting. These are very high acid grapes. And so cognac as a spirit is on the higher end of the acidity levels that we would measure or simply evaluate drinking them here together tonight. So how you drink it makes sense, because on its own, you might feel some sense of acidity, or you might like pairing it with something that has an orange context or the different citrus elements that you might get from the cheeses Tia selected. But it's also in the cocktail context. You can think of the most popular historic cognac cocktail, which is a sidecar. And a sidecar, after all, is a cognac sour. And so there are always sort of the elements of a balancing act of, do I engage the acidity or do I tamp down on it? And it's at any given time and with any given pairing that you might have different points of view.
I have a question about eating the rind. So all rinds are edible, except for the ones that are covered in wax. So then the question becomes, what did the cheesemaker intend and what are you willing to eat? With bloomy rinded cheeses, we should always eat the rind because the rind is a part of the character of the cheese. The cheesemaker has worked very hard on that rind so that it is a part of the cheese. And if you eat a bloomy rind, a soft ripened cheese without the rind, you are not eating the cheese as it was meant to be. So we should be eating the rind on the first three. And do we want to move on to the fourth?
That would be great.
So the fourth cheese is Springbrook Farm Tarentaise. It's made in the style of Alpine cheeses. And we could eat the rind on that. It's edible. And for this, I think you can choose either way. I'm probably not going to eat the rind on that, but you absolutely could. And I've certainly been in the Alps shoveling Alpine cheese in my mouth and definitely eaten the rinds. And so to me, Alpine cheeses are really nice pairing option for cognac because you get a mimicry happening. You get the toastiness, the caramelization. I think the first three pairings were a little bit about like textural contrast, whereas the next two pairings are about sort of reinforcing flavors. Someone else said, how should we cut this cheese? So I'll show you what I did. I did this, okay? But then my next cuts would be this from the center, okay? And again, you just want to think when you're cutting cheese, how do I get all the different sort of traffic signals of the cheese, right? So cheese ages from the outside in, so the center is different than what's closer to the rind. So you want to make sure you get a good cross section. It's all about a cross section. Smell this cheese. This should be like, the people who make Cheez-Its sit in a lab and they smell this cheese and they try to build that in a petri dish. It just has that wonderful cheesiness. Just as this in a graphic image would be sort of the universal sign of cheese, right? A piece of cheese with a hole in it, and we would know automatically that's cheese. I feel that the smell of this cheese is the same thing. It's just the universal cheesiness of it all. But,
Well, go ahead.
yeah, let's do the
I
cognac.
was going to say, for me, what really stands out that I keep coming back to on this delicious cheese is the nuttiness.
Yeah.
There's a gentle sharpness to it, but there's a nuttiness that I really think you could say is ideal in a comparative nature with this cognac. I will say this cognac is a real treat to have. The Park Single Vineyard XO. So extra old, you'll recall minimum age of eau de vie must be 10 years. That being said, the brandies that are blended here are likely 20 to 25 years old. And so for me, while there's some things I might not put in a cocktail, this would be one of them. So this is more on the pleasant sipper side of things, the slower, longer enjoyment over a cheese just like this, because the complexity, just like holding the cheese in your mouth, will evolve slowly. It will unfold slowly, naturally, patiently. That being said, when we talk about sort of the relative caramel levels of these first four cognacs, this is the boldest so far to me. Lots of bold caramel on the nose.
Yeah. And that's why I transitioned to this style of cheese with this pairing, because I think it really is sort of a different beast and really needed that supportive pairing of this sort of caramely, nutty. There's also like a real mustardy thing happening in this taste.
And this becomes more challenging, of course, as you've tasted more cognac and more cheese and more cognac and cheese. However, I would also say that from a textural standpoint, the Park XO is also a bit drier, if I can give that a wine context. It has a drier feel on my palate, right in the middle of my tongue. And that lends itself, I think, to some other flavors that I'm getting on first taste. Sort of a dustier chocolate, as if you were dusting, a cake or something at the end, just as a finish, a little bit of dusty chocolate. And then it evolves back into even more richer caramel before I get to some of the typical notes of citrus and orange peel perhaps, candied orange peel. I'll pound away at orange blossom, and then a nice lingering spicy finish. Again, to me, going back to that nutty quality of this cheese, that is just a little bit of nuttiness and spiciness that slowly evolves as the flavors carry on and dissipate ultimately on our palate. I hope you're enjoying this one. We'll go on to our last pairing. Oh my, here we go. A unique cognac here. I'm just gonna pour myself a sample in a new glass. And you'll notice a bit of a lighter hue of Jean-Luc Persuet, and you'll see it's organic, an organic cognac. And I won't go into the details. You know simply that it means that this is in fact certified and has its own indications to it, which are vital here in our ever-changing world and the need to take care of things. But if you take this on the nose real quick and take it away and really quickly think, what are those things that come to mind? This has a beautiful, beautiful floral nose to me. Really exquisite. And while I said I wouldn't necessarily take some of these older cognacs and use them in a cocktail, I must admit that with my sample, I made a Sazerac, a very classic American cocktail that has its own history to it as well. But boy, oh boy, this is as delightful as cognac gets, frankly. And again, we're
putting so many orchard flowers, like apple flower, pear flower.
A more gentle caramel, but maybe on the spice note, something akin to ginger. And I don't throw it around loosely, but you hear it a lot with aged spirits, a note of tobacco. I would say for me, this is the first that I'd say, you know what, the drying quality on the middle of my palate does give me effect of a little bit of cigar, gentle, medium wrap cigar tobacco, but that ginger or gingerbread cookie quality to me keeps recurring now that I've had this on my tongue for a bit, but very balanced and very structured of orange, chocolate, ginger that keep undulating back and forth in almost a cyclical rotation.
And for the cheese, I just wanted a really good Parmigiano Reggiano. I love a hard crystallized cheese with cognac, something that has a lot of complexity, that's giving you fruit, that's giving you spices, that's giving you all of these different things to enjoy with a cognac like this. I mean, I've mentioned several times they're talking to each other. A good pairing should be a conversation between two people, I want to say. And in this house, frankly, spirits and cheese are people. And I love the textural relationship that's happening here. I think it's really nice to have those crystals from the cheese, adds a really fun aspect to the pairing. It's kind of as heavy as I want to go with cognac. I personally don't want blue cheese and cognac. I want something that leaves space for the experience, that's just not like aggressive. And I feel like these two do a really good job of talking to each other. And then also I knew that you'd get pieces, so I wanted to make sure that everyone got a piece of cheese that would be utilitarian and they would enjoy in the coming weeks. And so, you never throw out parm if it gets moldy or anything. Run that mold off. And so this cheese will be with you for a while, and I wanted to make sure that we left you with something like that.
Well, if there are any last questions, please feel free to chime in. I know we've tried to cover about as much as we possibly could in a very short time frame. So this is really a nascent primer on some of the, hopefully most of all, fun aspects of cognac, of cheese, and pairing the two together. I hope it leads you in your own course to experiment with some new things or maybe non-traditional things. Tia, thank you so much for all of your knowledge here.
Alan, thanks. This was really fun. Let's do it every Wednesday.
That sounds good to me. Every Wednesday and Sunday, perhaps. I will just remind everyone again, if you are interested or planning on posting anything in social media, it's @ or hashtag Cognac USA or hashtag Cognac Connection. And in addition, there will be a recording of our presentation and time with you this evening, if that's of interest and use. And finally, with I hope, good graciousness, you will be receiving a questionnaire by email so that we can get your feedback and make these types of presentations as useful and I hope as entertaining as possible. And most of all, good health to you all, and thank you for your time and sharing it with us tonight.
Thank you all. Have a good night. Keep it cheesy.